The greatest battlefield is the mind. You know, being behind bars is not near as bad as being behind bars in your mind.
Tulsa Talks is the podcast that is inspiring people to have everyday meaningful conversations to gain perspective and help the world.
When I got out of prison this last time, I was in a downward spiral with depression.
That'll eat you up.
And when I tried, it got to the point where I asked my parole officer, I said, is there any, because I have fallen off, is there any type of recovery assessment or assistance that I could get? And he says, we don't provide that.
Yeah. The jail system sucks, man.
Said,
It's
can you just
not
go ahead and
okay.
send me back to prison because I can't do this anymore? He said, I can't even send you back.
Yeah. Let me hit you right now. That's a way to do it. I watched a guy while I was three, and I think I might have mentioned this last time you were here, that went and turned themselves in because it was a frigid night at jail at David L. Moss. Did I tell you about this? I used to go in David L. Moss with the Gideons every Thursday night and hand out Bibles and share with people about my perspective and how life could be better. And a few times, 2 or 3 times, there were homeless people go in. I'm here to turn myself in. This is my name. Here's my ID. I'm sorry, but we can't put you in jail because you don't have any warrants. Now, if they were thinking right, they could have just smacked somebody in the head. Is that right or wrong? Would they have been arrested at that point?
Yeah.
Would they have not had to spend the night out in like 20-degree weather or 15, whatever it was that night?
Yeah, they'd been set up for a little while.
They'd have got what they wanted. But instead of lashing out like that, they meekly, mildly just turned around and went back into the 20-degree weather or whatever it was.
Yeah, we had a good friend. His name was Clarence. I send my condolences to his family. But he was an older gentleman that used to stay in front of John 3:16 shelter. And, when we would go over there to chapel, and of course I stayed there too at the shelter, we'd get him something to eat, something to drink. He went through a pretty traumatizing experience to the point of he didn't want to be around showers. He did not want to be indoors. He was so traumatized that he would deliberately stay outside no matter what temperature it was just to avoid. And John 3 tried to help him as much as they could, but he was just...
Yeah, if you can't come indoors, it seemed like John 3:16 would have a hard time helping.
Right. They did everything they could. And he was, he was one of our, like Norm Peterson off Cheers, the Norm, you know what I mean? He was Norm. And unfortunately, he froze to death this last winter. And that was something that really took a toll on me and a lot of the other guys because he'd been around the shelter years. And it just...
it's family, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's family.
He always had a positive attitude, regardless of his situation.
Yeah, he knew his limits and he avoided those things. It's amazing how our emotions and trauma can harm us physically.
I had brothers that were in the program that died from overdoses. They'd go on pass and not come back. And even lost a good friend that was a graduate. Used to take our van and take us to Skytook First Assembly. He fell into such a great depression that, he ended up ODing under a tree at the park. That's where he was found. And I look at homelessness. The norms see rebellion, but when you're inside that environment with them, you see the mental and emotional disabilities.
Yeah, you see brokenness. And you see people that life didn't go the way that they thought that it should go, and also you see mental illness, and you see people that just don't know how to deal with life in the normal way, and they find that way. And they find community in that too. There's a lot of people that are hurting in all walks of life.
Yeah. No, that's real. I think the saddest moment, this older gentleman was sitting up. You know, John 3 has those metal benches in the warm room, or whatever you want to call it, in the front, and he was sitting up, and he had his hand across that bench. He took his last breath. He'd froze to death, had walking pneumonia. Took his last breath, just like that. And, you know, I've seen death from an overdose, but, you know, to see something like that, just it broke my heart, man.
You actually saw it.
Yeah. Yeah, my ex-girlfriend, I had to pull her out of her mother's bedroom on Thanksgiving Day. It was around 10 o'clock. Her mother was cooking the night before, but her mother was a pillhead, and I guess she got a hold of something that was too strong. And, you know, the pills were all over the floor. In the position she was laying in her bed, she was trying to fight to get up. But, you know, when her mother's boyfriend came out of the bedroom, he was calling an ambulance. And my ex-girlfriend went into her mother's bedroom, was hollering, "Mom, Mom, get up, get up." And I finally had to pull her out of her mother's bedroom. You know, that was in 2000.
Yeah.
And I still have that image in my head.
There are battles in every walk of life. And then there's total war zones in some people's lives. Some settings are not really just a normal battle of trying to figure things out together. Sometimes they're full-blown war zones. And that's what you're describing this morning. People live in war zones sometimes and have no way out. At least it seems like there's no way out to them.
The greatest battlefield is the mind. You know, being behind bars is not near as bad as being behind bars in your mind.
I used to go in David L. Moss every week, and it took me for 3 or 4 years, every Thursday night, handing out Bibles and telling people God loves you and all this. And I came to that realization that you can be behind bars in the physical realm and be completely free. Or you can be walking around, no matter what part of society you're in, socioeconomics or nothing to do with this. It seems like it. But I know people of all walks of life, and some people are absolutely in their own prison sentence in the highest realms of socioeconomic levels. And people don't see that as well. The homeless people, man, I've met a couple of them that were well-adjusted and happy, and that's what they wanted for that time of their life because that's what they needed. They didn't need the pressures of bills. They didn't need the pressures of going to work on a regular basis. One guy is coming to mind. Wendell is his name. Some of you guys in Tulsa might know him. He's got a little bulldog and a red wagon that he pulls his bulldog around in. He makes these trinkets, roses and scorpions and different little art out of copper wire. Did we show you that at our house, Kevin?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Next time you're there, we'll show you.
But
intricate artwork, and he was an electrician at one time, and life got to be too much. Just too much. And he's got an amazing adventure. Last time I talked to him, maybe a year ago, 6 months to a year ago, he told me that he had rode his little electric motorized bicycle, pulling that red wagon with his dog in it all the way to Corpus Christi, Texas.
Wow.
Broke down on him, and homeless people are resourceful. They can get money. And so he got a Greyhound bus ride for him and his dog back up here. But that's not normal for a man to be able to be somewhat adjusted in that situation that I've seen. Most people revert to drugs and alcohol and all of that. Is that accurate? Is that what you've seen?
You
to
know,
cover it up?
Yeah. With all that I'd seen out on the streets, with the blood and everything that I've seen being locked up, I came across, I had two guys in there in the county jail. One was going down for capital murder. I did a Bible study with him. And another one was Billy James. And he was in his late 30s. And he caught an aggravated 40. And I seen tears rolling down his eyes as well, because he knew that he was probably more likely going to die in prison. You know, and the other one, Stephen, you know, he was doped up. Him and his wife were fighting, and he was chasing her around the house, and the gun went off, but he didn't know she was pregnant. And that, you know, he was catching a capital murder charge, and I used to watch him bite his lip, even to the point of it bleeding. You know, and it's like...
Man, these people aren't human. What are you talking about? These people don't have abstract, different challenges than other people do. They're not human. We need to dehumanize them instead of bringing them and their hurt to light. Right or wrong?
That'd be the simpler way out.
That's what society does right now.
You know, society's trying to suppress their inner battles because they don't know how to take an outlet, or they don't even know there is an outlet. And then there's the other ones who felt like they pushed the envelope too far and drove themselves over edge.
Yeah.
You know, I think even with everything that I think about with the homeless, I really think about the blue collar man and his family and the struggles just to stay above water, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they try to find a church home, but with all these sects and denominations and all this politics and everything has caused a blur, even in our church community.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say First Assembly. Scott took First Assembly, Pastor Mack and his family, and the church took us John 3:16 guys in, and I'm truly grateful for that. And you know, the Spirit-filled church that I'm going to, and the brothers and sisters in recovery in there, and I'm very blessed to be a part of that community, because it's a different type of transitioning light.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that brings a sense of peace, because I know in all the years that I've done blue collar work, I could never manage my life. And my hat's off to the blue collar family that is still doing the right thing. You know, I just
there's different pressures for everybody in life, and the pressures that I think when we don't find our purpose and our passion, that those pressures can be overwhelming. But if you're living where you should and you're in alignment, that can absolutely be freeing. I propose. I know what my life is when I get out of bounds and when I get jerked back into alignment. But a lot of people don't know what kind of pressures there are. Elon Musk says about himself that a lot of people would like to be him, fantasize about being him. He says, I would not wish my life on anybody, because I have all of these thoughts and all of these ideas and plans. And I mean, he sleeps at his factory sometimes. He slept on a friend's couch for years after he's already made all kinds of money to get different things launched. And those are pressures too, but he knows where he fits. And I propose that if we can help people find where they fit, that those pressures can be a life adventure instead of something that destroys you. Alignment and having the peace of God, knowing that you're here for this purpose. Those distractions of the harsh reality of navigating life become different.
right.
And you're in the middle of transitioning again through a John 3:16 mission program, and about to enter into a friend of ours' transition house or sober living facility. Philip Brotherton, here's a shout out to you, man.
Yeah, brother. Thank you.
So tell us about what the last year has been like at the mission for you. And this isn't your first time going to John 3:16, or is it?
It is.
Okay. But you spent how long there?
3 years.
And normally people spend how long?
I've got one gentleman has been there longer than me.
Oh, wow. I thought it was a 1-year graduation program.
They know the challenges that some of us face. You know, I went through the program when it was down at the shelter. And of course, they transitioned over to the refuge, and I went through the program again because they had developed a new format, and they wanted everybody to start over fresh and go through that format with the counselors. And you know, Pastor James, my hat's off to you, brother. You know, he's the main reason that guys are able to stay there, because he understands. He came from an alcoholic home, single parent home, and started going down the wrong path at a very young age. And you know, he understands. And you know, none of us truly want to be in that position, but it's just like you told me earlier, Kevin, sometimes you need to be humbled. You need to stay humble.
Did I ask her to tell you?
You told me, and I appreciate that.
I said maybe it could be this.
Well, I think, you know,
I try to tell people very little. I try to ask more questions.
No, I was okay with that. God was speaking through you, because it was already going through my mind and my heart. So don't apologize. But you know, going through that format again, and you know, the first 2 years, yeah, I had my challenges with trying to transition, find a job, health issues. So there was some things that I had to overcome that took humility.
Yeah. And what we were talking about earlier, so everybody knows, is authority is there, like it or not. You can, in the United States of America, you can choose not to be under that authority some way, even anywhere. Are you going to submit to the authority or not is a personal question. What can you help in that situation? How can you become more alive and maybe even help the authority to be able to see something different by your actions of allowing them to have their authority and navigating the way you should instead of rebelling? And life challenges happen. We all have situations that we don't like, and how do we navigate them without complaining? Is because the Bible tells us not to murmur and complain.
Right.
But it's so normal for people to get together in a group. The news media does it continuously. Complaining, criticizing others and all of this, instead of just living and trying to help the good things be brought to light. Instead of moving in a positive direction, a lot of people dwell on the negative and try to criticize and say what's wrong instead of moving toward the light. They're like in bondage with that.
Well, I am totally grateful in a lot of those areas that you're speaking of. I've got a relationship with my daughter Erin. God bless you, sweetie. Got a relationship with my other stepdaughter. I went to her graduation this last year.
Yay.
And I was sober.
Yay, double yay.
Yeah. But I think one of the, in Ephesians 6, verse 1, honor your father and your mother. When I had to make the decision to take my mom off the ventilator, the nurse asked me if I wanted to leave the room. I said, no, I'm going to hold on to her while you do it. That way, my mother knows that I did the best that I could to honor her. And I was able to do it sober, and I was able to pray over her when this was happening. All those years had gone by, and I pondered over my childhood because I used to give my mother flowers. She spent more time weeping over our situation than she ever did smiling, and that took a toll on me. Because I wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. And even to this day, I caught a couple felonies at the age of 11, and they had handcuffed me, put me back in the squad car, and then of course I ended up at juvenile hall. And my mother was crying because the felonies that I had committing were destructive as far as private property, and she was crying. And I felt so much shame over that. But it didn't stop me from breaking the law. And from the age of 11 to where I'm at today, and I'll be 48 in February. These last 3 years were the most sobering times of my life. And I had to make a lot of changes as far as that institutionalized state of mind, because a lot of brothers that are in prison right now that I did time with, that was the only time they ever felt safe. And my childhood was rough. And that was the only time I felt safe. And, I spent a lot of time praying. I prayed when I was sticking the needle in my arm for God's grace and mercy. Taking a crack pipe and smoking it in a public restroom at a park. And just years of going through that torment. I wasn't trying to chase the high as much as I was trying to escape from myself.
Yeah. How do we forget the things that are behind us and press forward to the goodness of God? Is a question that's just all in me today. How do we allow those things in the past to equip us to move forward and not have that shame and that guilt and view that as a horror story like a lot of people do. How do we get past that point and there's nothing to mask at that time.
No.
If we're free from that bondage and we're not wanting to return to that bondage because we're living in the purpose and alignment with God, and He's transformed us, not just by the words that are coming out of our mouth because we know the Bible forward and backwards, but because of the actual work that He does for His people, in His people, and through His people. How do we get to that point? Have you gotten there?
Yeah, I hope this YouTube video goes out to the homeless, the men and women who are struggling with it right now that have your phones. This message is for you, and I hope you can embrace the fact that Jesus does love you, that God does want the best for you. But at the end of the day, it's a choice to get help. And I want to reach out, and I hope the guardian angels can bring this message to the homeless. If you're on your phone right now and you're struggling with your addiction, whether it be in a tent or under a bridge, get help. Use Family Children's Services. There's Hope Ministries. There's John 3:16. There's the Salvation Army. There's so many ministries out there that will help you embrace this change. At the end of the day, I had to make a choice. And I had to put in the footwork. And, and I hope this message goes out to them who are on their phone. You don't have to be in bondage to yourself unless you choose to be. And at the end of the day, I had to make a choice. Do I embrace the past to repeat it? I embrace the past to understand God's love and mercy and grace over my life, who's time and time again embraced me when I was in a place of being no good, whether it been in my addiction or deliberately, because I was upset and I was angry. Society doesn't owe me an apology. I owe society an apology. When God's umbrella is over you, and you do finally sober up, and you do finally get counseling, and you do finally get help, it allows you to see the clarity in all those times. Even though I don't smile much, and you've mentioned that a couple times, I am happier today than I've ever been. Not just because of God's grace, and not just because Jesse, Sarah, and you have taken me in. I really appreciate you guys, and I love you dearly.
Thank you. We love you too, man.
I appreciate the whole ministries. I appreciate the guys. Brother Dalton, if you're listening, I love you, brother. I'll see you, not this Sunday, but next Sunday. My hat goes off to Tulsa, Eddie. We stuck his neck out. Ken, Crossroads Church. God has brought me a tremendous support group. But
why do we need a support group?
I'm gonna tell you.
Why is a support group a good thing to have?
Because you need a different perspective. We need our elders. We need another perspective. When we get caught up in our own head, as we said earlier, you're creating a prison for yourself that's unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I need a different perspective. I was talking to a brother at John. I was helping him with his book work. And we were dissecting the environment and the people to help him better generalize. And I'd asked him a question. I said, do you see the world as it is, or do you see the world as you feel? The world's going to have its problems. Very much true. But there's a difference between the world's problems and me creating my own. And
you can take a magnifying glass and let the sun shine through it and burn the grass up, or you can allow the light to give you what you need. So if you're magnifying the challenges of the world and what you've experienced, and you're introspecting and just thinking about these things that have happened to you and the situation that you're in, that there's no way out, and you're magnifying that, it can be crippling.
It can be devastating to not only a different perspective and way of life, but it always drags us back down into that place of depression and anxiety, which leads us back to drinking and using.
Yeah. And what you mentioned is that you're not only being helped by people, you're helping people. A lot of people miss that key. A lot of people miss the key, and they make it me. But if that life that we're living doesn't flow through you into helping others.
Self-preservation comes from the preservation of others. Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one brother takes accountability. In order to preserve, I have to give back. You know, Jesus said, Kevin, you're going to reap what you sow. So whatever you put in your recovery, you're going to get it back. Whatever you put into loving another human being, you're going to get it back. And, you know, I've mentioned to the guys, I even mentioned it at church, I don't have 3 years sober, I have today. I said, I'm one decision away from another drink or another drug. I said, my recovery is your recovery, and your recovery is my recovery. I no longer look at the performance behind recovery as much as I look at what can I learn today from my recovery.
Do you think there's a point past acknowledging recovery potential? Do you think there's a point of just living in the flow of love and not, I mean, AA gets people to stand up and say, I'm an addict. CR says, I've got these problems and I'll always have problems inside myself. It's always going to be an internal conflict, basically. Do you think there's a point past that where you're just living in the flow of God potential?
I think that really, you know, I've been a part of AA since 2001, and, you know, it was a safe haven for me at a point in time. You know, when you talk about spirituality and you talk about transition, I'm already reminded every day that I'm a potential alcoholic again or addict. I don't need to feed into that disease as far as my identity. And as much as I love the brothers and sisters of AA and NA, it's one thing to acknowledge where you could be and where you was, but it's another when you place your identity. My pain is supposed to redefine me, not define me. And there's going to be a point in time to where you actually have to outgrow. You know, Bill W., which was one of the founders of AA, he said, you know, it's not that we don't think about alcoholism, but at the end of the day, it's a personality change. If I don't change everything, then nothing changes. And a lot of alcoholics have really, they either don't know Bill W., or they've never tried to really look into what he was trying to say. You know, he wrote a book, Language of the Hearts, and he was talking about the guilt and the shame of being a womanizer, from being a drunk and destructive, and all the things that had happened. But he confessed his sins before God on a psychiatric ward, and got a spiritual awakening. You know, and a lot of that's missed in the rooms of AA. People just want to get on this rampage, and you eventually have to outgrow that state of mind. Now you can think about those things and ask God for direction so you don't repeat them, but they're supposed to redefine you, not define you. And I think at the end of the day, you have to outgrow it. You know, I don't.
What do you grow into though? Because you're coming out of John 3:16, going into, I don't even know what Philip's halfway house or transition house
I don't know what the name
is.
of it is either.
But anyway, you're going into a group home of helping each other live better. And what's the next step? Where do you see your life when you step into that house?
Well, I do know today that God's will for me is to be an asset, not a liability to the community and to myself. And that community, it not just involves family, but it involves the workplace, it involves the church setting, working with other men in recovery. Today, I'm not complicating that. I'm living in the moment. And I know in order for me to preserve any type of recovery in my life, to stay an asset, I got to be in recovery. I got to be around them. I got to embrace them. Doesn't mean that I can't find love or get married if that's even plausible. But what is plausible today is that I'm being an asset, not a liability. And that's all God wants for me. And I do know that this life on earth is temporal. It's fleeting.
Very short. Very short.
And as important as the destination is at the end of the road, the journey is what defines that destination and my place with Christ.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm focusing on today is the journey. And that's important for me because, you know, when I try to place my identity upon the things of this world, from the world setting, Kevin, you're a divorcee, you're a single parent child, you're an ex-criminal, you're an ex-junkie, you're an ex-alcoholic. And that's from the world standards. I've got to outgrow that standard and just be to be common on common ground. And that's important for me. And today I'm looking at my identity in a different manner. I am made new, so I need to act. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to slip up. I still have a problem with nicotine. I still like caffeine. I do have sometimes I have a short temper when I'm on the highway. Sometimes it's at work. I don't act out. But I don't want my brothers and sisters out here to think that walking with Christ makes you immortal. In fact, it makes you more mortal than ever because you're becoming more sensitive and aware of the things that you say and you do. And I just try to keep this walk as simple as I can. I don't complicate it like I used to. And I do know things. I do know two things that are certain, besides paying taxes. I'm going to live and I'm going to die. Now, what do I do in between that is what's important.
How many people are in self-imposed prison cells like we talked about a while ago, and that's basically Walking Dead?
I believe, you mentioned earlier about transitional housing. My brothers and sisters who are coming out of the system, they need a safe haven. More often than not, they're having to go back into the old environment because they have nowhere to go.
Right. And they have a hard time finding a good job. They have a hard time getting transportation to meet their requirements. They have a hard time to do many things. And it seems like there's a better way to do this than currently happens or currently exists. And we have a team that we're putting together with 4 different aspects of this to be able to facilitate that transition much smoother.
Well, I can tell you this, with all that they desire as far as manageability, they want a safe place to lay their head, first and foremost.
Yep.
And in all the years that I've been locked up and been around my brothers, that was the one thing that they mentioned the most, was a safe place to rest, to lay their head. Everything else, yes, is a bonus, but that's most important to them. And there's an underlying fear, and that's why many of us become institutionalized, because that's all we know. And at the time, it's the safest place, even though I don't recommend being locked up. But a lot of times that's where that institutionalized mentality comes in. It's a safe place.
Yeah.
You know, inside the system, you know, lying, cheating, and stealing that we did out on the streets is not, it's forbidden. And that
you guys keep each other in check.
You know, if the world system had a prison mentality, there'd be a lot less stealing. There'd be a lot less lying. Your handshake means something. There's a different aspect, and that's why, you know, when people say, "Well, you just got a prison mentality," I'm thinking to myself, you need one, because if you had one, you'd be more accountable. And you know,
somewhat more in the military type setting where you have uniforms, you have a certain way of doing things, you have schedules and procedures, you have a
well, don't get me wrong. There's there's a lot of things that go down in the system that
and that's what keeps most people in check.
Yeah.
The things that go down, nobody wants to have that, so most people stay in check.
Yeah. You know, and what's ironic about that, and I'm not saying that stuff doesn't go down. There's a lot of stuff that does that shouldn't be going down. But it's just ironic that the very nature and order that we wanted in our personal lives that we didn't get, we created a system and a format behind bars. A lot of things don't make sense, but God works. God's ways are not our ways. And he uses everything for a reason, either to bless us or correct us.
Which correction is a blessing.
Yes. Yes.
If you take the correction.
If you embrace it. Yeah. But, I learned a lot about my recovery when I had to do what I had to do with my mother. All I wanted to do was honor her and be sober, and I did it. And I prayed over her. I embraced her for another couple hours. I wept with her. I cried with her. And in that process, I got to take medical power of attorney over my brother, who's extremely sick. And he asked me to do the same for him. And I was able to make a conscious decision sober and be reliable in that aspect when that does happen. I left the hospital in peace that day. And it's ironic because my ex-wife, who passed away in 2016, was in the cemetery right down the street from the hospital that my mother died in. And I got to embrace that moment in peace, because it did a complete number on me in 2016. I was in recovery, and I fell off. So much had happened over the course of those 15 years that I was in her life. And I felt like a part of me had died and went with her. But in that aspect and in that moment with my mother, I was able to find peace with my ex-wife. I was able to find peace with my mother. I was able to be an asset, and I was sober, and that was a good moment for me. As painful as that was, I asked God to take back the life that brought me life, and He did. And my mother died in peace, and she didn't die alone, and that's all I could have ever asked for. Is that moment, and I got it, and I embrace that moment, even to this day. I don't think about anything negative because I know she's in heaven. That's all the years that I've tried to pray over her. That's all I wanted was peace over my mom. She got it. So.
And you got it.
I got it.
When you pray for others to receive, you receive.
You reap what you sow, and whatever you put into it, you're going to get back out of it.
So if you've been sowing improper things, you're liable to reap them for a little while.
You play stupid
games. And it
games.
might take a little weeding of the beds, so to say, to get your life back in alignment.
I'll tell you
this. It might be a little bit of a hard transition to replace those weeds that you've planted with good fruit.
You know, to simplify that statement, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. So, but then there's the transition period too, that we need to be real with ourselves, right, is what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah.
I'm changing my life. I'm going to do good things. Well, you still have those bad seeds that you're going to have to remove from your life, and you're going to have to walk through that garden to get those weeds pulled out, redirect your life, and start harvesting the fruit that you're currently planting. So there is a transition time there to get that garden back up and healthy.
Right.
And that change can happen suddenly inside yourself, but the garden is still there full of weeds surrounding you.
Yeah. You know, I had an old alcoholic tell me one time, says, Kevin, you sober up a horse thief, you still have a horse thief. So, Kevin, everything has to change or nothing changes. And it's just like I mentioned out of Bill's book. You know, and I look at the weeds today in my life, there's shortcomings, whether it be with anger, jealousy, envy, strife. Those are shortcomings for me, and those are the weeds that I have to pluck when they come. Doesn't mean that I'm still not going to live in the flesh. Even Paul said that in Romans 7. But I don't have to act on those shortcomings like I used to.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm talking beyond that, where people are trying to get their life back in order and live a normal life in society. If you've messed yourself up with not paying taxes or ruining your driver's license or having this work history or being an addict or whatever, and it's ruined your life and your ability to live, okay, so you become born again.
Right.
Those things are still there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And you've got to walk through that, and you can do it joyfully, step by step, through a good process of proving yourself. You might not be able to get the best job that you think that you want because your track record says that you're not the right guy for that right then.
Right.
So maybe you have to build some traction in doing just something for a long enough period of time and doing it at a level of excellence to be able to be noticed.
Well, that's something I expressed to Dalton, now that you bring that up. You know, we were talking about his transition with work, and I had to go through, I went through a couple other jobs to get where I'm at today, but I had learned something from those experiences. And yeah, I want my brothers and sisters to understand that you're going to have to transition from and you may go through jobs. You may go through a process of relationships. These things are going to, in order for me to truly be pruned, I have to go through them to prune them, but I have to recognize them. And, it's...
Or maybe just freaking weed it out, man. Weed it out. Some things you just got to get rid of in your life to be able to walk through to something like a poverty mindset.
Right.
You have to throw that out.
Well, you
Like-
you can't think your way into right living. You got to live your way into right thinking. It's
Yeah.
an application.
Yeah.
As easy as I would like to think it was, just to weed it out, it's definitely a process that you have to go through. Everything that you battled in your addiction, you're going to have those same battles when you're sober.
Exactly.
And it's that living your way into right thinking. Don't think your way into right living.
Sure.
You know, I think Proverbs.
But that's actively
Yeah.
weeding. It's not thinking. It's actively weeding that stuff out.
Yeah, it's
Faith,
definitely
faith
definitely a
without
process.
works is dead.
It's definitely a process.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just now growing into my sobriety. I'm almost 48, but look how long it took Paul and a few others. You know, it's definitely a process. Definitely a process.
Yeah, and don't think it or imagine it any other way. We
Yeah.
want to bring truth to people, and just because you have an internal shift doesn't mean that everything external is going to resolve itself immediately. Some things can resolve themselves. Other things take actual steps of living into right thinking.
Right.
So hopefully we've helped somebody today. I know that I always learn something when I have a good conversation, especially with Kevin.
I love you, bro, and I appreciate you, man.
Thanks for coming, Kevin.
Thank you, brother.
We are here to help you discover or develop your passions, how you can use them, and why you exist. How can we help you help others better?